There's a lot to talk about. How many of you were part of the 15 million strong people all around the world who marched against the war in Iraq on February the 15th, 1 month before the invasion? That's almost everybody in this room. We were, however many of us are in this room, part of 15 million people all around the world on every continent who marched to stop a war from happening. It was the first time in history that that many people had organized in advance of a war to try and stop a war from taking place. It was the culmination of quite an extensive amount of organizing, local organizing, national organizing, global organizing. Many of the people involved in that organizing had come from and saw that organizing as very much a part of their anti-corporate globalization, global justice organizing. One of the initial meetings that happened that helped plan that day of events happened in Porto Alegre, Brazil, as part of the Alternative Summit, which were the Alternative Summits started to counter the Davos summits, where we decided that instead of protesting against Davos, Switzerland, and the World Economic Forum, we would start holding our own alternative forum where we would articulate our vision of the future. And hundreds of thousands of people ultimately started gathering in Porto Alegre, Brazil, yearly, to articulate and organize around our vision for the future. And it was in Porto Alegre where the culmination of local organizing came together to have a meeting where people said, we need to have a global day of protest, and we had it. And I was part of 150,000 people marching in San Francisco. I was moved to tears in that march. There were so many people, and the crowd, so a cheer would start somewhere by someone. One person would start with a cheer, and it would move into 50 people around them and 200 people around them, and then it would move to 150,000 people, and then you could hear it echoing off the buildings. And the power and the passion and the spirit, people who were out who had never been out before, you knew, out in the street, a mass diversity of people coming together with a vision, with a hope that if that many people came together, we would stop something terrible from happening. It didn't. The terrible thing happened. The day that the war began, I was among many, many other people in the streets of San Francisco who we used our bodies to shut down the financial district of San Francisco. And we targeted the corporations behind the war. And we sat down in the middle of the street in front of the Bechtel Corporation, in front of the offices of Chevron, in front of the offices of weapons manufacturers and weapons purveyors, and in the middle of the street. And we shut down the entire financial district. I sat locked in lock boxes next to two people blocking Market Street. And we were locked into our boxes, so we couldn't move anywhere. Turn off your cell phone, Bill. Jeez. And one of the things that I was most amazed at was that we were locked down, right? So we couldn't move. And the police came, and they took first the group of people who had just been locking arms and were in front of us. And all of those people were removed. And then there we sat, the people locked down, and the fire department came with chainsaws and were getting ready to drill us out of our lock boxes, and the sparks were flying and the pain was setting in. Believe me, it was quite painful. And in response to that, wave after wave after wave of people who were just on their way to work, just regular folks going to work in downtown San Francisco, sat down, linked arms, sat down in front of us. Then they got arrested. Then the next wave of people, just on their way to work in San Francisco, sat down, linked arms, sat down to protect us, and then they were arrested. And the city was completely unprepared for the level of solidarity. They knew about our protests. They knew what we were going to do. We were very public about all of the organizing. We told them what we were going to do. We told them what we were going to shut down. And what they didn't count on was that the entire city was going to support us, and the entire city was going to come out. And the city was shut down because the police did not believe in the solidarity that we could create. That was the day the war began. We thought it would help shunt the process of the war, that it would stifle the ability of the Bush administration to launch the assault that it intended to launch, most importantly, because we were targeting the corporations behind the war. We didn't succeed in that. Many people saw these, shall we say, lack of success. 15 million people marched. I marched on a Saturday, and the war still happened. I sat down on the streets on a Monday, and the war continued. And the press said, well, clearly, activism doesn't work. Clearly, mobilizing doesn't work. And some people believed that and took that to heart. But many, many, many other people said, this is the start of something for me. I have connected to others. I have connected to a community. And now I'm going to organize for something else. And for many people, that something else was the 2004 presidential election. And they were going to organize to stop Bush from becoming re-elected president. Now, many of us believe that we succeeded in that. That Bush, in fact, was not re-elected president, but rather reappointed president. But however you want to see it, the press then said, well, clearly all of those people who organized to keep Bush from being reelected, clearly that organizing doesn't work. And many people went home and many people were disgruntled. But many others weren't and continued to organize on the massive number of issues that continued to arise due to the failed policies of the Bush administration and the Congress. And many of that organizing received significantly increased momentum with the tragedies of Hurricane Katrina and Rita. And the intensification of our realization, if you don't mind my alliteration, of the real effects of failed policy at home. That failed policy kills people, whether it's at home or abroad, and new movements organized. And for many of us, in 2004, the culmination of that organizing and those communities that have been brought together and that strategizing succeeded when the Republican Congress, much to the chagrin and much to the failure of vast, vast, vast amounts of money expended by the largest corporations on the planet, by the leading lobbyists, by the leading backers of the status quo, when the Republicans were forced out of Congress, and some of the worst policymakers in the history of the government, including, I'm from San Francisco, and Richard Pombo was the congressman from Richmond, which is where Chevron Oil Corporation is based in San Ramon, California. The Richmond refinery is one of the oldest oil refineries in the nation, in a largely African-American low-income community, one of the worst polluters in the nation. Richard Pombo held Chevron, held the Richmond refinery in place, supported the oil industry, supported the war, supported everything that was terrible. Richard Pombo was kicked out. No one thought that would happen. He was just one example of many, many, many others. And the Democrats were put in control. And most of us celebrated for a minute. And then reality set in, and my Congresswoman, Nancy Pelosi, became and is one of the most powerful speakers ever to guide the United States Congress, brought a lockhold down on the Congress, and she didn't single-handedly do it, but she deserves a heck of a lot of credit, stifled everything that we put that majority in place to accomplish. Everything, to the letter. Nothing happened. Nothing went forward. Nothing that we sent them there to accomplish took place. Now, one of the things that Reverend Yearwood and I share in common is a history with Congressman John Conyers from Michigan. I used to work for Congressman John Conyers. I was a legislative assistant on Capitol Hill. I worked inside the Democratic Party for as long as I could stomach it, and then I left. But for me personally, as someone who had been through that, had made that commitment, knew many of those members of Congress personally, knew many of the staff personally, to see the utter failure of what it meant to have the Democrats in control of Congress was heart-wrenching. And it made many people who had continued organizing go home and say, man, you know. But what has been true is that we have, in fact, continued organizing. And where we stand today is at an unbelievably critical and important juncture in our politics. We are in the middle of a political cycle, unlike any other that I think this country has ever experienced for many reasons. But what's critically important for us as progressives, and I'm going to take for granted that I can say us, and if I'm wrong, let's make sure that we have a lively discussion on that. Is that our issues are sort of being bandied around, right? I was part of the protests. I helped organize the protests for the WTO, shutting down the WTO in Seattle in 1999, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank in 2000, protest after protest after protest that succeeded remarkably well in stifling almost completely the progression of the World Trade Organization, stifling almost completely the power of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, participating in the movements that helped radically alter governments across Central and South America, incredibly successful movements. Our issues on free trade and anti-corporate globalization are front and center in this election, are they not? We, in the peace movement, the war is front and center in this election, is it not? Issues of global warming, climate change, hurricanes Katrina and Rita, poverty, economic dislocation, race, gender, the recession, all front and center in this election. But for me, a very disconcerting way. So, for example, I do not agree with either Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama's position on trade. They are not progressives, neither one of them. Hillary Clinton, I just don't even want to start with what it is that she's talking about or not talking about, or what her position is or wasn't is and could have been on free trade. Barack Obama, who has voted for trade policies while he's been in office, for free trade agreements while he's been in office, also talks about labor and environmental side agreements. That is not what we have been asking for. That is not what we have been being arrested for. That is not what the people around the world and in the United States are asking us for, is a cleaner, nicer, friendlier free trade. It's not it. On the war, Hillary Clinton, at best, taking her to her exact policy to the letter, would have us out of the war at best in 3 years, more likely 8 years based on her plan that she has articulated, more likely significantly longer than that based on what we know about her economic policies and her backing, because we know who has provided her economic support. And thus far, it has been the largest corporations, including the largest oil corporations. Barack Obama, harder to figure out, and believe me, I have tried very, very hard to figure out exactly what his plan is for getting us out of the war. It includes a maintenance of the embassy, the largest embassy in the world. It includes a maintenance of troops. It includes protection for what is kindly referred to as infrastructure, which to me is a very scary frame for the oil industry, and the need to maintain troops to protect the oil industry, and the need to do anti-terrorism work, which is what another word that he is using. All very scary to me. All very scary. On issues of the economy, On issues of climate change, for heaven's sakes, the man supports clean coal. I mean, I was shocked when I read that. I'm sorry. Clean coal and nuclear power, and that's disconcerting to me. Now, there's many other areas, but on the other hand, I am deeply, deeply moved by the number of people that are moved by him and moved towards the message of change and something different and something positive and something that we can move towards. And one of the amazing things that we were all talking about at dinner is that the way I started this conversation, articulating our organizing, is that we have built the base. Reverend Yearwood pointed this out to me, made me feel much better. We have provided the base. We have provided the base on which the Obama movement is riding. It is the organizing, the articulation of the problem, the articulation of the solutions. The majority of Americans oppose the war. The majority of Americans are aware of the issues on which we speak. So what that leaves for us is, one, I think, being very excited about the number of people that are getting out, getting involved, feeling passionate. That is only good. That is only positive. The number of people who feel that oil companies are a massive problem that has to be addressed, that the war in Iraq is a war about oil that must be exposed, that a potential threat of a war against Iran is a threat that is real and present and that we have to work against and that we are afraid of and that we have to stop. And that the vision of the United States in the world and the way that the world sees us is a problem that we have to address. And what that leaves for us is that we have to help the country see beyond elections. That if any one of us was elected president, I would not feel that much better, even if it was me, and particularly if it was me, than I do right now. That is not to say that the president is not critically important and makes very important decisions. What that means is that it is just one office, and that policy change and political change is very difficult and requires not an office holder, but movements and social movements. And that the energy that has been created about this campaign is about the suffering that Americans feel and see and are a part of, and the hope that they still have that things can be made better. Unfortunately, because of the way our politics is organized, people look towards savior politics, that one man, and maybe a woman, will ride forth and carry us to the better future. And we can put our faith in that one person. And they will do the work, too. We can go home the next day and go back to our regular life, and all will be better. And if history has taught us anything, that's not true. We need charismatic leaders and thinkers and organizers and motivators, and that's important, and we want to embrace them. But what we have to do as organizers ourselves is to look at all those people who have been inspired and say, what comes next? And talk to them and say, what comes next? The day after the election. Hillary Clinton talks about her, on the first day in office, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I don't like any of the things she proposes, but that's all right. First day in office, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So we have to turn to ourselves and say, the first day that whoever's in office, what are we going to do? What are we set up to do next? What have we used this election cycle, the raising of our issues, so that we are ready that next day? And how can we, between now and then, ensure that every time the war is talked about, that we demand to know, when is the war going to be over? This is not complicated. The war needs to end. Not what is your 5, 10, 12 troops in the 6th and the 7th month and the 10th, 12th and the combat troops and the no, it's very, very simple. Iraqis are quite clear whenever they're polled. They want Americans out, period. They don't ask for a transition period and could you provide a little safety with your troops? No, that's not what they ask for and not what they demand. They demand our troops gone. That's what we have to demand and have to make clear as being articulated. On trade, it's not okay to say we want side agreements, and as long as you're talking that you don't like NAFTA, that means you're with us on trade policy. No, it's not what we've been asking for all of these years. That's not it. And on a whole list of issues, which we know and I don't have to articulate, that's our job. That is our job between now and then. And I think that I know that we have the capacity to do that because we have done amazing things in our organizing. If you will recall, 5 years ago, the majority of Americans supported the war, felt it was the right thing to do. They absolutely do not now. And that is the case on a whole host of issues of which our work has made the difference. Before I stop, I want to put in just two pieces real quickly of just information. I just finished a new book called The Tyranny of Oil, the World's Most Powerful Industry and What We Must Do to Stop It. And my focus is on oil companies because where I see the heart of this war and ending this war is in exposing the role of the oil corporations and their expectation that this war is just the beginning. And where we sit right now is that Exxon, Chevron, Conoco, Shell, BP, and Total are just about to sign contracts with the Iraqi government. These are 2 to 3 year contracts. This is not what they're hoping for. This is what they are settling for in hopes of a much better goalpost, which is the passage of an oil law in Iraq, which would transform Iraq's oil industry from the current nationalized model to a privatized model and give them 30-year-long contracts and ownership of Iraqi oil. And what has been very clear is that for that to be maintained, the U.S. military presence in Iraq and in the region will also have to be maintained. And there are permanent bases being built. One of the most important, I think, for us to keep our eye on is a U.S. naval base that has been built on Iraq's oil export terminal, which also happens to be right on the Iraq-Iran border. So that there is a permanent U.S. military facility guarding Iraq's oil and looking right over, oh, how conveniently, to the second largest oil reserves in the world, Iran. And that I believe that this administration, before it's over, is very, very much committed to an invasion of Iran in some form. And that this is the time when we also have to be aware of these issues. That the planning by the oil industry, by the corporations that put this government into office, they're not sitting around sort of watching the Democrats debate and, waiting for the election, right? And that we have to continue to pay very, very, very close attention to these developments as they move forward. I'd be very happy to talk more about the sort of technical and substantive issues around that in the questions. But I want to leave you with this. It is a time of hope. And the hope is there because we've helped put it there, and we can continue to make it happen. So thank you all very much for coming out.